One man thought it was just another traffic stop. One woman was a seasoned officer shaped by discipline, honor, and quiet strength. And that night, those few minutes on the street showed the world just how silent and yet how heavy justice can be. And if you want to join us for more powerful stories, don't forget to subscribe. It was a little past 11 p.m. The streets were quiet, the city almost asleep. Just a few night shift workers and some stragglers on the road. In the darkness, a black SUV drove steadily down the street, nothing flashy, just official and clean. Behind the wheel was Major Nora Reinhardt. She was heading home after a federal meeting, having already driven 2 hours. Her eyes were focused on the road, her mind already halfway home, thinking about her bed and the silence waiting for her. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving, just calmly driving in a straight line. But that didn't matter to Officer Mark Delgado, who was 5 hours into a painfully dull night shift, scrolling through his phone and sipping cold coffee. Then he noticed the SUV. Military plates, but driving civilian, he muttered, narrowing his eyes. That, to him, was suspicious. He tossed the coffee cup aside, flicked on his headlights, and hit the red and blue flashers. Nora noticed the lights in her mirror and calmly pulled over. No panic, just protocol. She placed her hands on the steering wheel and rolled the window halfway down, exactly like she'd been trained to do. Delgado approached, fast flashlight in one hand, the other near his holstered gun. Instead of going to the passenger's side, he came straight to her window. License and registration, he barked. No greeting, no explanation. Nora didn't flinch. Officer, may I ask why I'm being pulled over? She said calmly. Delgado shined the flashlight right in her face. You changed lanes without signaling. Might have been drinking. Nora raised an eyebrow. I haven't. License and registration, he repeated, louder this time. Still composed, Nora reached slowly toward the glove box, retrieved her documents, and handed them over. She added, briefly, this is a government-issued vehicle. I'm a federal employee. Delgado glanced at her ID. Military, huh? He said with a smug grin. Think you're above the law? I never said that. Nora replied, her voice still calm, but firm. Delgado's tone hardened. Step out of the vehicle. I'm administering a sobriety test. Nora squinted at him. Excuse me. I said get out. We're doing a test. Her patience was wearing thin, but she stayed in control. On what grounds? I've cooperated. I haven't been drinking. I'd just like to know the reason. Delgado stepped closer. So now you're refusing a lawful order? He snapped. No. I'm asking for clarification, she replied. But even that seemed too much for him. He yanked her door open. Out. Now. At that moment, Nora quietly unlocked her phone, opened the camera, and started recording. This interaction is now being documented, she said steadily. Delgado paused for a second. His eyes flicked to the phone, but he didn't back down. Step. Out. Nora stepped out. Her posture was straight. Her movements were deliberate. She wasn't in uniform, but she carried herself like a leader. She didn't resist, didn't yell, but she owned the moment. Delgado made her do a field sobriety test like she was drunk. Walk a straight line. Nora walked it calm, steady, clear. Her voice was firm, her balance perfect. Still, Delgado wrote her a ticket for failure to maintain lane. Nora took the citation without a word. She just looked at him. Then she got back in her car and drove off. Delgado had no idea. That piece of paper was going to end up in a courtroom. And it wouldn't just put his career under fire, it would raise questions about the entire system. Mark Delgado had been a cop for 15 years. His time on the streets taught him how to read people but not how to respect them. For him, the job wasn't about upholding the law. It was about showing who had the power. The morning after the incident, his laughter echoed off the gray walls of the precinct. Chatting with a few officers during break, he talked about the stop like it was no big deal. Some woman tried to get all high and mighty with me. Said she was military. One of those federal ID types, he said with a smug grin. A younger officer, Luis, frowned. What was her name? Reinhardt. Something like that. Luis's expression shifted. You mean Nora Reinhardt? Major Nora Reinhardt. Delgado paused. I don't know. Maybe. Luis straightened in his chair. Major Reinhardt serves at Fort Stanton Logistics Command. She spoke at the academy last year. 2 tours overseas. Bronze Star. She's a legend, sir. Delgado set his coffee down. That cocky look on his face cracked just a little. So what? She's still just another driver to me. Doesn't change anything. But it should have, because this wasn't just some random person on the road. Delgado was slowly realizing he'd picked the wrong person to mess with, or rather, the right person in the worst possible way. Meanwhile, at Fort Stanton, things were quieter but far from calm. Nora Reinhardt was already at her office. She still wore the plain clothes from the night before. No coffee on her desk this time, just a case file. She hadn't slept, but she wasn't tired. Her mind was locked in, focused. She had replayed the traffic stop in her head over and over, the way he looked at her, the tone of his voice, the way his hand hovered over his gun. This wasn't just a routine stop. It was a clear moment in a long chain of behavior that too many had chosen to ignore. There was a knock at her door. Master Sergeant Eric Morales stepped in. "You all right, ma'am?" Nora looked up. "I'm fine. I've already taken the necessary steps." Eric came in and closed the door behind him. "I saw the footage. They can't treat a senior officer like that. It was unlawful." Nora nodded. "I've sent it to my attorney. Military command has been notified. A civilian lawsuit is also being filed. This could cause a major stir," Eric said hesitantly. "It should," Nora said, locking eyes with him. "This isn't just about me." Because it wasn't just about one disrespectful cop. It was about a broken pattern, a system that kept letting it happen. And too many had paid the price for staying silent. Nora wasn't going to be one of them. The next day, she met with military legal advisors. The footage was reviewed, the audio analyzed, and every legal document was prepared. Nora didn't want revenge, she wanted her stance to mean something. Because her silence wouldn't just hurt her, it would fail every young officer coming up behind her. Within a week, the case was filed: unlawful stop, intimidation, and abuse of authority against a federal officer. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the local police department. That morning, when Delgado opened his mailbox in the station parking lot, he found a yellow envelope. Court summons. His heart jumped. He tore it open. Defendant: Officer Mark Delgado. Plaintiff: Major Nora Reinhardt. Charges: unlawful stop, misuse of authority, intimidation. He rubbed his forehead. "You've got to be kidding me." Inside the precinct, the air had shifted. His co-workers avoided his eyes. Whispers followed him. Then came the call. He was being summoned to the captain's office. He knocked and stepped inside. Captain Gerald's face was unusually serious. "Sit down, Delgado. We need to talk." "The major thing?" Delgado asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, and it's not just a thing anymore. It's an investigation, a public concern, and very soon, it's going to hit the press." "I was just doing my job. I'm not apologizing." "Do you even understand what you did that night?" Gerald snapped. "You treated her like a criminal. You didn't even bother to find out who she was." He slid a file across the desk. "We watched the footage. Both hers and your body cam. You were aggressive. You gave no explanation. You behaved like a threat." Delgado's voice dropped. "So, I'm getting punished. You're going to court. And yes, there will be consequences." From that day forward, everything changed for Delgado. The laughter stopped. The younger officers no longer looked up to him, they avoided him. His uniform hadn't changed, but the respect he carried in it had vanished. As for Nora, she didn't speak to the press. She didn't go on camera. But her case kept building step by step with her attorney, Clara Jensen. Evidence was cleaned up. Witness lists were compiled. The legal ground was solid. And through it all, Nora said only one thing: "If I stay silent, the next woman's voice will be even harder to hear. So I'll speak not by yelling, but by standing, by showing the proof, and letting the truth do the talking." 3 weeks had passed. What had started as a simple traffic stop had now turned into something much bigger. One of the city's largest courtrooms had been reserved for the case. The media hadn't shown up yet, but the buzz had already escaped the courthouse walls. Military representatives, civil rights observers, a handful of law students, and a dozen uniformed officers sat quietly, waiting. Because this wasn't just a trial about a ticket. This was about power, and how it gets used. Mark Delgado was the first to arrive. His suit was perfectly pressed, but you could see the tension in his face. He nodded stiffly at the security guard, then sat next to his lawyer, Thomas Eberly, whispering a few words. His eyes kept darting to the courtroom doors. Everyone was waiting for one person, Major Nora Reinhardt. And then, the doors opened. Every head turned. Nora stepped in with her head held high. She wore her dress uniform perfectly ironed, medals gleaming, rank crisp on her shoulder. She didn't say a word, didn't look away. She didn't need to. The silence that followed her was louder than any speech. In that moment, it wasn't just Delgado who understood who she was, it was everyone in the room. Judge Valeria Tainer entered shortly after. She was a former military attorney herself, and her presence on this case was no accident. She adjusted her glasses and opened the file in front of her. Case number 2138, Major Nora Reinhardt versus Officer Mark Delgado, civil rights violation, she announced. If both sides are ready, we'll begin. Nora's attorney, Clara Jensen, stood. Your Honor, we'd like to call our first witness, Major Reinhardt. The judge nodded. Proceed. Nora stood, adjusted one button on her uniform, and walked steadily to the witness stand. Not just like a soldier, but like someone who had nothing to hide. When she sat down, she glanced at Delgado just once. No anger, no bitterness, just a look that said, now the truth speaks. Clara began. Major Reinhardt, could you walk us through the night you were pulled over? Nora's voice was steady. I was coming back from duty, driving a government vehicle. I was within the speed limit. I wasn't distracted. I hadn't been drinking. Then I saw the blue lights in my mirror. I calmly pulled over. What happened next? Without any greeting or explanation, I was asked for my license and registration. I asked why. He said I might be intoxicated. There was no basis for that. I handed over my documents, explained who I was, and still, the tone escalated. He pressured me to step out of the vehicle. Did you start recording at that point? Yes. To protect my rights and document the encounter, I started filming with my phone. The recording clearly shows the threatening behavior. Clara nodded. Thank you. And were you afraid in that moment? Nora paused briefly. No, but I was alert. Because too many people, especially women, especially black women, get hurt in situations like this when they stay silent. I didn't stay silent, but I didn't shout either. I just documented. A murmur passed through the courtroom, but it faded quickly. Nora's words had weight, like they bounced off every wall. Then Clara presented the footage from Nora's phone as evidence. The courtroom watched. Delgado's harsh tone, his silence, his hand hovering near his weapon. There was tension, there was aggression, but no crime, no reason. Then came Delgado's body cam footage, and the silence hit like thunder. Every frame told the same story: impatience, raised voice, a smug expression, flashing dominance. And Nora? Calm, respectful, compliant. Delgado's lawyer, Eberly, stood. Your Honor, my client was simply doing his duty, acting in the interest of safety. The judge looked directly at Delgado. Were you facing any real threat that night? Delgado stood. No, there was just unusual behavior. Unusual? Or just questioning your authority? Judge Tainer asked sharply. Delgado froze for a moment. His eyes dropped. Maybe both, he whispered. The tone of the courtroom had shifted. This wasn't just about one woman. This was about a stance. Nora wasn't on trial, her discipline was. And Delgado's long time, I know better attitude had finally hit something it couldn't push past. That wall was a woman's spine. The verdict hadn't come yet, but everyone in the room already knew this case wasn't just about punishment. It was about a system finally being forced to look in the mirror. The morning after the hearing, Mark Delgado woke up earlier than usual. Before his alarm even rang, his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling in the dim light of his bedroom, not moving for minutes. The trial wasn't the only thing on his mind. What truly rattled him was the way Nora Reinhardt had carried herself in that courtroom. It wasn't her uniform. It was her silence. For the first time, he saw that you didn't have to shout to win. When he walked into the station, everything felt different. The footsteps in the hallway didn't echo for him anymore, they moved away from him. No one met his eyes. No one sat with him at the coffee table. He still wore the same uniform, but it didn't carry the same weight. Loneliness had settled on him like a second skin. Especially the younger officers, they didn't look up to him anymore. They looked through him, not with respect, but with caution. Later that day, Captain Gerald called him in again. When Delgado stepped into the office, a new file was already open on the desk. The complaint has reached the Department of the Interior, Gerald said. The press is asking questions. The longer we stay quiet, the more the pressure builds. But more importantly, this department finally understands something. We can't cover up things like this anymore. Delgado looked down. If I had known who she was, maybe I would have handled it differently. Gerald took off his glasses. And that is exactly the problem. So it does matter who someone is? You only show respect to people with rank. So what if she'd been a regular woman? You would have ignored her, wouldn't you? Delgado didn't answer. His lips parted, but no words came out. Because Gerald was right. And that silence was the first real reckoning in Delgado's 20-year career. At the same time, across town at Fort Stanton's logistics wing, the mood was more composed. Nora Reinhardt had returned to her usual routine for the first time since the hearing. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes still held steady. Nobody asked her to talk about what happened, because she had talked in that courtroom, with her presence, with her patience, with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to defend. Around noon, news broke throughout the base. The hearing footage had been made public. Civilian oversight had released it, and within hours, social media lit up. A silent stand, the major who faced down power without raising her voice. Thousands of shares, comments pouring in. But Nora wasn't proud. She hadn't done this to become a symbol. All she wanted was for accountability to mean something. Then her phone rang. It was Clara, her lawyer. "You ready?" Clara asked. Nora's voice was calm. "Is it time?" "Tomorrow morning. 9 sharp. The jury's been deliberating for 3 days, but honestly, we're walking in strong." After the call, Nora set her phone down and took a deep breath. She looked out the window. The sky was gray. A light breeze passed. The silence in the air wasn't as heavy as the courtrooms, but it still felt like a pause before something big. What would happen if they won? Would Delgado be punished? Or would the system do what it had always done, protect one of its own? Because this wasn't just about her honor. This was a case that would echo through dozens of others. That night, Delgado sat alone in his living room. The case file lay open in front of him, Nora's statement, video transcripts, pages of public comments online. Everything had gotten bigger. What had started as just another traffic stop was now threatening to bring his entire life to a stop. His phone rang. It was his mother. He didn't answer. He didn't want comfort. He didn't want excuses. He just wanted time to roll backwards. But time doesn't do that. And until that week, he never imagined how powerful a woman's calm why could really be. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., the verdict would be announced. Nora arrived at the courthouse with steady steps. Same uniform, same presence. At the entrance, 2 young female soldiers gave her a silent nod. Nora nodded back. She wasn't proud. She wasn't angry. But she was ready. Delgado had arrived earlier. He sat at the defense table, staring into space, not even whispering to his lawyer anymore. There wasn't much left to say. The jury had reached a decision. When Judge Valeria Tainer entered, the room rose. The air was thick, but no one made a sound. "We have a verdict," Judge Tainer said, lifting the file. "For the matter of Reinhardt versus Delgado, the jury has reached a decision dash." Delgado took a deep breath. Nora closed her eyes for just a second. And then, the verdict was read. But that part comes next. It was 9:03 a.m. in the courtroom. Judge Valeria Tainer held the file in her hands. Her voice wasn't sharp, wasn't soft, just clear. You could hear a pin drop. There were no cameras, no flashes. But the air was thick with tension. Everyone knew a few sentences could change everything. "The jury has reached a unanimous verdict," Judge Tainer began. "We find that the defendant, Officer Mark Delgado, did violate Major Nora Reinhardt's constitutional rights." Delgado lowered his head. His lawyer, Thomas Eberly, pressed his lips tight but showed no reaction. Nora didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. This wasn't a victory for her. It was just justice delayed, but finally delivered. Judge Tainer continued. "The actions of Officer Delgado are deemed an abuse of power and classified as an arbitrary and threatening use of authority against a federal officer." A quiet ripple spread through the courtroom. This wasn't just about one man, it was a direct hit at an entire culture of behavior. Some of the observers looked down at the floor. Others finally exhaled, as if they'd been holding their breath for weeks. The court orders the defendant to pay $35,000 in damages. Additionally, this decision will be submitted to the Department of the Interior and the Toledo Police Department. A formal disciplinary review of Officer Delgado's conduct is to be initiated. Delgado's face had gone pale. His hands gripped the edge of the defense table. For the first time in his career, he'd been stopped, not by another badge, but by the quiet force of a woman who never raised her voice. When the hearing ended, Nora walked out of the courtroom alone. Her lawyer, Clara, caught up with her, phone in hand. A few media outlets are calling. If you're open to interviews, I'm not, Nora said simply. Not harsh, not rude, just final. There's nothing left to say. I already said it in the record. Clara paused. You know, we could have gone after more money. I know, Nora said, looking out the hallway window. But I didn't want money, Clara. I wanted it to stop. I wanted someone to think twice next time. If even one person hesitates, that's enough for me. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniels, her deputy at the base. Just 2 words. You won. Everyone at Fort Stanton had heard. But Nora just read it once, slipped the phone into her pocket. There was no celebration in her. No pride. Because this had never been about winning. It had always been about reminding. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, Mark Delgado sat on the steps. His collar was up, his face hidden behind the yellow envelope, now carrying the weight of a verdict. A few reporters had gathered. Cameras pointed at him. One asked, Officer Delgado, how do you feel about the verdict? Are you planning to resign? Do you have anything to say to Major Reinhardt? He just shook his head and stood up. Didn't say a word. Got in his car. Drove off. But no matter how far he went, that verdict would always stay one step ahead of him. A week later, the Toledo Police Department placed Delgado on administrative leave. An internal review was opened. Social media buzzed. Some praised the decision as long overdue justice. Others said it went too far. But Nora didn't reply to any of it. She stayed silent. Because her work wasn't done. That same week, she was invited to speak at the orientation for new cadets at Fort Stanton. The auditorium was full, eager, young faces looking up at her. Most of them hadn't seen the real weight of the world yet. She began quietly. I'm not going to talk to you about the battlefield today, she said. I want to talk about the difference between wearing a uniform and deserving it. The room stilled. Every eye was on her. A person isn't a leader because of the uniform on their back, but because of the backbone inside it. Power should only be given to those who understand its limits. Because when it isn't, that power hurts people. She paused, and then added, and one day, if someone wrongs you, remember this. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand your ground. Because sometimes, standing in silence is louder than any scream. Months had passed. The streets of Toledo had gone back to their regular pace. But things weren't quite the same. At the station, Mark Delgado's name still floated around quietly, in hushed conversations. He was no longer on active duty. His personnel file now had a new note. Position reassigned following disciplinary review. The Department of the Interior had issued the order. He was pulled from the field and placed behind a desk. He still wore the uniform, but it no longer meant anything. No one openly shunned him, but he felt it. Not just the uniform, but the trust he thought he'd built. It was gone. Now he came in, signed paperwork, and left. Quiet, unnoticed. But the part that cut the deepest? Not a single rookie came to him for advice anymore. One afternoon, during lunch break, he stood by the tea machine when a voice came from behind. Officer Delgado. It was a young female officer. Her eyes were shy, but respectful. I watched your video, she said. Actually, Major Reinhardt's. The way she carried herself. I'd never seen someone be that powerful. Without getting angry, Delgado looked down. Yeah, he muttered. So did I. He didn't say anything else. Because some apologies are too heavy to carry out loud. But for the first time, his silence wasn't denial. It was awareness. Meanwhile, at Fort Stanton, life moved on. Nora Reinhardt returned to her daily routines. Convoy logs, route updates, training schedules. She showed up every morning at the same time. Left with the same quiet purpose every evening. To anyone who didn't know her, she looked like just another officer. But everyone did know, her silence had become a lesson. One morning, she was scheduled to speak at a welcome session for new cadets. She had notes prepared, carefully written, but she didn't read a single word from the page. Instead, she looked them in the eye and spoke from the heart. Some of you are here for a career. Others, for duty, a calling. But remember, this rank doesn't mean control over those below you. It means the courage to stand tall, even when the one in front of you outranks you. From the back, a hand went up. A young cadet, nervous, curious. Ma'am, what if something like that happens to us one day? How do we know what to do? Nora paused, then said, if a voice inside you says, this isn't right, trust it. You don't have to yell. Sometimes, not looking away is all the resistance you need. She continued, the officer who stopped me. Maybe he would have acted differently if he'd seen my rank. But I didn't care who he was. I cared about how he acted. That's where the real difference lies. The room was silent. No applause. No cheer. Because they understood this wasn't about heroism. It was about responsibility. And that hit deeper than anything else. That same evening, as Nora returned to base, her phone buzzed. New email. From Federal Law Enforcement Oversight Board. Subject: Speaking Invitation, National Law Enforcement Standards Conference. The message read, Dear Major Reinhardt, in light of the ethical and institutional awareness your recent case has sparked, we would be honored to invite you as keynote speaker at next month's National Internal Police Training Summit in Washington, D.C. Nora read it, then closed her phone, slipped it into the glove compartment, and kept driving. Because for her, this journey wasn't about podiums or headlines. It was about showing up, every single day, with the same quiet strength. Epilogue: The definition of power. Months later, a new module was added to the Toledo Police Department's training curriculum. Leading with respect, not rank. The case of Major Nora Reinhardt was now a core case study. New officers reviewed her testimony, body language, and the footage from that night. And in the very back row, in plain clothes, sat a former officer. He no longer appeared in lesson plans, only in internal review files. But the most important thing? He had finally learned what could be heard in silence. This was never the story of a loud voice. It was the story of a steady presence. If this story moved you, remember, justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just stands its ground. And if you want to join us for more powerful stories, don't forget to subscribe.